Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 10th annual AAAS Communicating Science Seminar. We're so excited that you all are here, and thank you for your patience with the delay here in getting started with the broadcast. My name is Alana Kimbrell. I am with the Center for Public Engagement with Science and Technology at AAAS, which seeks to enable or facilitate dialogue between science and society, ongoing conversations in which both science and society can draw on relevant information and expertise from multiple perspectives to both improve science and public outcomes. For those who weren't here this morning, at the Communicating Science Seminar, we bring together all those who are interested in public engagement with science to hear different perspectives and help us all to do more and better engagement. We'll be tweeting today from @AAAS_SciComm with the hashtag AAASMTG. So this session on reciprocity, equity, and relationship building in science engagement is co-sponsored by our fellow AAAS program, the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion, which facilitates communication and engagement between scientists and faith communities. Through this virtual platform today, we are able to gather from all over the world and the country. I want to gratefully acknowledge all the diverse and vibrant Indigenous peoples on whose ancestral homelands many of us stand. I am joining you from Northern California in the ancestral homeland of the Ohlone and Muwekma tribes. For those in North America, I encourage you to visit native-land.ca as a starting point to see what Indigenous communities call your region home and to learn more about them. In addition to the panel happening now, our discussion sessions at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which provide more chance for interaction and conversation, will be coming together to unpack and process the Communicating Science Seminar, science communication to get policymakers' attention, connecting science communication researchers and practitioners to improve and make use of the science of science communication, mentorship in science communication and engagement, and breaking boundaries, exploring SciComm from around the world with representatives from India, Israel, Kenya, New Zealand, South Africa, and the UK. I wanted to share, for those who haven't seen it, the Inclusive SciComm website, inclusivescicomm.org, because they recently published a starter kit, and there's also a crowdsourced Inclusive SciComm resource list there. So I'm sharing this as just one of many excellent places to look for more information and background after today's sessions. So now we have a couple of short polls for you to get to know your interests and motivations for being here. So even if you were at the earlier session today, these are different questions. So please join us on your phone or your computer. Go to slido.com and enter event code 203476. So we'd like to hear from all of you about why public engagement with science is important to you. What first things that come to mind for you? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining here. Great. So we go from making an impact, it's my job, and responsibility, improving science, building trust. Great, thank you so much, everyone. This is wonderful. Okay. Great, thank you. And we have one more right now for you. What do you hope to take away from today's session? So, you know, kind of what are you coming here hoping to take away? New ideas, effective strategies, relationship building. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This is super helpful. Okay, I will leave that running, but in the interest of time, I will move on. And I want to introduce to you now our moderator for today, Dr. Julie Maldonado. She's a public anthropologist whose scholarship and community work focuses on community-based participatory research for climate adaptation, disaster recovery and preparedness, and environmental and climate justice. She serves as the Associate Director for the Livelihoods Knowledge Exchange Network, a nonprofit think tank for policy-relevant research toward post-carbon livelihoods and communities. In this capacity, she serves as co-director of the Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences, which facilitates intercultural relational-based approaches for understanding and adapting to extreme weather and climate events, variability, and change. Dr. Maldonado is also a lecturer in the University of California, Santa Barbara's Environmental Studies program and for Future Generations University. She co-founded the Disaster Justice Network and also currently serves as co-chair for the Culture and Disaster Action Network. Julie?
Thank you so much, Ilana. It's great to be here with you all. As Ilana said, I'm Julie Maldonado, calling in today from the central coast of California on coastal Chumash land. It's a great honor to be here with you and share this time together. And thank you also to everyone joining us this morning, afternoon, depending exactly on where you are. For those who are able to join the previous session, today, we'll be building on some of the themes that were shared during that session, pulling on some of the threads, if you will, of discussing long-term engagement and commitment over time, of accountability and collaborations, considering building mutual trust and understanding, and really at the heart and center of this, developing relationships as the foundation for our deep dive together into building connections and reciprocity between scientists and communities, and these very blurred lines and boundaries. And for today's session, we'll be discussing the ways of building the connections and relationships that are deeply and intimately integral to effective, respectful, and mutually beneficial public engagement with science, particularly with communities that have been mistreated by scientists. And we think about the historical traumas and legacies being brought into current work and collaborations. This will include the perspectives of public participants, scientists doing engagement, and practitioners of science engagement and communication. And our speakers today are going to discuss a variety of approaches to engagement built really on the principle of reciprocity in a variety of different contexts and areas of science. And we are greatly honored for the opportunity today to learn from our very inspiring panelists. We have with us Nicole Hewitt-Cabral, who's the Director of Public Engagement with Public Agenda. We have Adam Paris, who is the Deputy Director of Climate Science and Risk Communication with the City of New York. Reverend Christopher Spencer, who is the Community Engagement Officer with Black Belt Community Foundation. And Dr. Pamela Payne Foster, who is with Preventive Medicine Public Health Physician, who is a preventive medicine public health physician and is a professor of community medicine and population health at the University of Alabama. And I'll be turning it over to our speaker shortly, who will provide a much more robust introduction of themselves for you. And so first, starting with Nicole and Adam, turning it over to you to share a joint introduction about your work and partnership focused around ideas of restorative engagement, centering communities in cycles of knowledge exchange, ideation, and action. So thank you very much, everyone. Excited for our session today, and over to you, Nicole and Adam.
Thank you, Alana and Julie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Hewitt-Cabral, and I work for Public Agenda. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to public opinion research as well as public engagement. Now, in terms of public engagement, we believe that communities and people in communities have the power to shape their communities in ways that are inclusive and accessible. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of projects that we have been working on that are sort of under the banner of cycles of engagement. So next slide, please. Under cycles of engagement, I will be talking about cycles of resilience, and Adam will be talking about the climate knowledge exchange. Next slide. So under cycles of resilience, it really is a process, quite frankly, that pulls together best practices around public engagement and participatory democracy. It includes ways for people, different types of people, to engage in different ways in an annual cycle that really the intention is for that cycle to become a regular part of the rhythm of how people interact in their communities with each other, as well as others, including scientists and policymakers. So the cycle starts actually first with listening, then with community building, deliberation, ideation, and action. Next slide, please. So with listening, we started off with listening sessions that really the intention was to create a welcoming environment that's comfortable for community members. It was an open invitation for people to come, talk about what's important to them in their community, challenges, and what they see for themselves in terms of the future for themselves and their family. Really important to be attuned to the community. We were working in the Canarsie section of Brooklyn, in a community that's predominantly West Indian, so something very important, just even providing food and food that matches the culture of the community. Next slide, please. In terms of community building, we designed a set of engagement games that could be played in various settings, could be played, we played them at tenant associations, basketball tournaments, different environmental days. And I'll talk a bit about how important the games were to the cycle. But next slide, please. But it really, again, was a part of a way to just incorporate fun into engagement. Next slide. We also were able to take advantage of the City University of New York had a research vessel, and we brought folks from the community onto the boat so that they can see their community from a vantage point. It's an amazing day. Many people actually didn't even know they lived on Jamaica Bay until 6 feet of water was in their basement after Superstorm Sandy. So it was an important opportunity to show them their connection to the water, as well as their community from the perspective, I guess, of the water. Next slide. Then we actually had a deliberation phase. The community said, we are tired of talking, we're ready to go to action. We honored that. In retrospect, it probably would have been better to have a time to kind of talk through the issues, but we went straight to action, had an action forum, as you see, that centered the community, where they were able to put forward different proposals, different ideas on how to really advance resilience in the Bay in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. Next slide. And then finally, we moved to action. So we, one of the groups decided that they wanted to deal with street level flooding. They formed the street team, connected them with scientists that could provide them with data, maps, flood maps, all sorts of information that they needed, and then connected them with the Science and Resiliency Institute of Jamaica Bay with their citizen science program, so that the citizens, community members can actually be a part of research, capture data that could move to policy change for addressing street level flooding in their community. Next slide.
Great. I'll pick up from there and just say a couple of quick things about the Climate Knowledge Exchange. So, I worked on cycles of resilience with Nicole while at the Science and Resilience Institute, and have since moved to the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And, I wanted to bring some of these same insights and techniques from practices from cycles of resilience to a citywide scale. And so we built this process, or we are in development on this process to give people, particularly communities made vulnerable by socioeconomic injustice, racial injustice, and climate change, a chance to weigh in on what research should be done. So it's great to connect the kinds of citizen science programs and information that the Science and Resilience Institute has to processes like cycles of resilience, but we also wanted to kind of say, what if that science started from a place of reflecting community concerns. And so we took this approach in the initial year of holding discussion groups, building a little bit on that model of the listening sessions, making sure that we could collect that qualitative information and then report on it in the city's first State of the Climate Knowledge report last year. One of the other things that we took away, one of the main things is that we hope to sustain this process over time, that we're sort of building a living climate research agenda that reflects public input for the city of New York on climate change. And so that approach maps to principles that I think we learned through cycles of resilience, the idea that public participation is good and should be co-equal. The idea that not that data rules the day, but that we actually collect qualitative data in a meaningful and respectful way so that we're acting on what we hear and not what we want to hear. And then if we repeat that process over time, we can not only include more people, but it creates a mechanism of accountability. And I believe that's it.
Thank you so much, Adam and Nicole, and especially appreciated what you shared with thinking about too it's a very cyclical process, and I can imagine in those images you had that there's also a lot of arrows between these and recognizing that this is a continuation. And I love that, Nicole, of sharing, how really getting people out into seeing, their community from different perspectives and different angles and ways, and doing that in a very experiential based kind of visceral experience. And so I think, exciting to see kind of that snapshot of your work that I hope we can learn more about as we go forward here. I know it's, it's hard to convey the kind of time and commitment and the deep levels of engagement, relationship building and trust building, and the work that you've done together over the years to really get to the point to be able to hold those kinds of convenings and community gatherings and bring a diversity of partners in. And just appreciate you sharing some of that foundation with us. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Pamela Payne-Foster and Reverend Chris Spencer now to share with us for their collaborative efforts and partnership focused on pastors and scientists as collaborators of building relationships and research. So Dr. Pamela and Reverend Christopher, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Spencer, and I'm pastor at St. Matthew Watson Missionary Baptist Church in a little small rural town in Greene County, Alabama. I also serve as the Chief Community Engagement Officer for the Black Belt Community Foundation, which serves 12 of the poorest counties in the state of Alabama and among the poorest in our nation. Prior to being employed with the Black Belt Community Foundation, I worked at the Center for Community-Based Partnerships at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Foster on a number of projects. As pastor, one of the main projects that we worked on was a project called Project Faith. And it was a project that was geared toward changing the stigma, decreasing the stigma among church leaders and congregations in dealing with AIDS and HIV, which is a research interest of Dr. Foster. I need to say this, and then I'll pay him to come to speak with us and to guide the project. In the Alabama Black Belt region, there's great amount of poverty. Great amount of poverty. As you see on the map, those counties that are in red are considered the Alabama Black Belt. So if you lay a belt across the map of the state of Alabama, these particular counties was known for their rich, fertile soil, as well as the large population African American that were there to farm cotton and those other kinds of things. In this particular area, there citizens and residents suffer from great health disparities, their lack of jobs, struggling education system. So we have lots of problems, but we feel like we are a part of the solutions to our problems. that we can provide voice along with the scientists to make life better in the Black Belt. Dr. Foster.
Next slide. Yeah, these are just some quotes here, just kind of talking about what Chris was saying about the Black Belt area, not only poverty, but fewer access to healthcare. So next slide. I love also what he said with that lack of hope, there's also hope. So that's where he comes in as a pastor. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I just wanted to sort of reiterate CBPR, community-based participatory research, because that's really been a foundation of what I've done as an academic over the last 25 years. And it really is a paradigm shift from the way scientists do science. I love the phrase listening from the other panelists, and sharing of power was what one of the persons wanted to get out of this session. And when you're talking about this type of research, it does sort of change the paradigm of what used to be to what we're trying to get to. And it's really an approach, a methodology that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. So I just really want to say that because what I'm going to talk about, what the partnership that Chris and I have had really builds on that, that he has things and expertise that I don't have. I don't live in the Black Belt. I live in Tuscaloosa. I'm not from the Black Belt. So he brings the history, he brings the expertise, rich culture, rich expertise that is there that I don't know. And these are the core principles of Barbara Israel. We call her the grandmother or the mother of CBPR, really talking about how we're shifting the way we've done research in the past, really understanding the strengths of communities, including them in all phases of research. About the projects we've worked on. Some of them are community engaged. Go back to the other one for a minute before I go to the projects. Some of them have been true CBPR where the community was engaged at the beginning. Some of them have been more community engaged. For example, Project Faith was my sort of concept and idea that I pulled in pastors. I knew I couldn't do research with pastors unless I had pastors on board. And so they were really partners with me. I had 4 different ministerial liaisons in order to recruit pastors for the project that I was doing. The other thing that shifts is that last one, disseminating findings and knowledge gained to all partners. So a lot of times in traditional research, we've gone in, gotten data, and never really reported back to the communities what happened. So that's an important principle as well. And that number 5, co-learning and empowering processes is so important because I have learned so much from the community and hopefully they've learned from me as well. So the last slide is just, I wanted to sort of give an idea of how long we've known each other and how long we worked together, which really sort of also talks about the trust building, that it takes time. Most of us in academia are on a timeline for promotion and tenure. So we're thinking about really moving quickly, whereas it really might not be beneficial for this type of research. So the next slide shows, I think he's going to the next slide. Yes, there we go. Oh, maybe 10 years ago or more, Chris, we started out with a true CBPR project that was funded by NIH over 5 years. And it was a project, I was over the core, community core, but the 3 PIs, it was 3 PIs on the project, principal investigators, and one of them was Chris's boss at the Black Belt Community Foundation. So she was involved at the beginning with all parts of planning the project, implementing the project, as well as evaluation of the project and dissemination. That project involved picking 10 academic partners to learn more about CBPR and 10 community leaders. And what we did was match them up formally to really sort of begin to try to work together. So that was 10, at least 10 plus years ago. Then Chris and I was co-PI on a PCORI grant, patient-centered outreach research initiative, where we also did this community empowerment, working in 2 counties, one in Tuscaloosa, unincorporated town in Tuscaloosa, one in Sumter County, where Chris is from, in rural Alabama. But I spent more time with Chris on Project Faith, as he mentioned. This was a clinical trial we did with 12 churches, where we recruited 20 members of each church, so about 199 persons from churches were involved in testing a anti-stigma faith-based curriculum to decrease their HIV stigma and increase their HIV knowledge. Very successful. I couldn't have recruited those many pastors and church members without Chris as a ministerial liaison, really working side by side with me. More recently, I have some projects here, all of them dealing with COVID-19. We have been able to engage much more because we had a relationship on the ongoing COVID-19 project, and we have used the last 2, which are italicized. We've used Chris as a consultant, really trying to get the pastor's perspective with some of the work, giving shots, spot on the shot, and Communivax was an ethnographic study, really looking at the equity of the vaccine rollout. And then I also interviewed Chris with 65 pastors in a regional sort of approach, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, to really understand HIV prevention among pastors. So these are just examples, and we can talk more in the discussion about really truly engaging.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pam and Reverend Chris, and especially your emphasis there on the time commitment, and you raised the kind of expertise and the diversity of expertise needed in this, and also flipping the script a little in some ways in who is seen as the expert and understood who holds that knowledge and information and wisdom, and thinking about the deep, often time-tested observations that are happening from the communities, often across generations, that is a science, even if we don't necessarily always label it as such, and that sometimes it's adding to that, bringing in additional specific expertise into that, but recognizing of who really has so much knowledge and wisdom to be guiding and leading the way in that collaboration. I really appreciate you raising these points, and in thinking about the collaborations and partnerships that y'all have been developing across time. I'm hoping that you can each share about how you initiated your collaboration and partnership. Oftentimes it seems really daunting, right? Like of people get really excited about this and they see, okay, yes, this is a really, this is the appropriate, the effective approach. How, right? And then as soon as they start thinking about how, 10,000 questions emerge. And so if you can share a bit about how you initiated your collaboration and partnership, thinking about what did that engagement process really look like, considering especially that there's a rich diversity of lived experiences as well as expectations coming into this, thinking about if you had, conversations about, for example, accountability, if there were specific protocols, agreements that were created, ethics to follow, what the consent process looked like. So I'd love just to open it up to all of you, whoever would like to start first, and sharing a bit about that, kind of those initial steps in your collaboration and your partnership.
I don't know if you want us to start.
Yeah,
start, Julie.
Yes.
Whoever would like to step up.
Yes. Yeah, I can start by, it's interesting. I don't think there are any formal, most of it has been informal with the trust building and engagement around what we're going to do, always open for conversation, including community members on presentations, on articles, that kind of thing. We just had a conversation the other day about data sharing. Not as much data sharing in these projects, but I think if the community had come to us and said they wanted to have access to data, that would have been possible. So that's a little different from the model Nicole and Adam talked about. But I am engaging in more and more projects where the data sharing is a part of the project. For example, a lot of artificial intelligence projects are now having that be a part of the process as well, but nothing formal, right, Chris?
Nothing formal. I think in 2006, when something must have happened at the University of Alabama when the vice president was started what is now the Center for Community-Based Partnerships. And so the university began to say, hey, something is missing. Our mission is teaching, research, and service. And we want to get out, we want our researchers to get out in the community to do research. And so I had an opportunity to meet Pam. And so we've been knowing each other since 2006. So, that's a long standing relationship, and not every grant that we went for together. And as I came to the university to work in community outreach and engagement, my whole focus was, how can I help this region? I had served as a county commissioner for 8 years in this poor region, and we need lots of things. Hospitals are closing. We don't have jobs. We didn't have lots of stuff. So, research was part of the solution, and we knew that our voice would be important in improving that. And so we went. I think when our first applications was a clinical translation science application, and we went out. And I learned this, that you cannot do community engagement and outreach if you don't leave off the campus. And the university was willing to leave off the campus and go into those settings in the communities with us and to hear from folks. We did focus groups and recordings and brought them back to the university and shared with other doctors and practitioners and researchers. So we developed that relationship. We did not get that award, but we built a relationship. And since that time, we've had numerous opportunities to work with Dr. Foster and others from the university.
I think Chris brings up an important point, sharing of resources, which universities have lots of resources, financial and non-financial, but the financial is also a big piece as well. So we have to negotiate, the university's indirects is 50%. We have to negotiate lower when we're doing community engaged work so we can put some of that money back into the community. So that sharing power is a real issue that we really are starting to try to see realized.
I think our partnership started organically, sort of similar to Dr. Pam and Chris's partnership. It was a slightly different moment. The communities that we inevitably worked with were recovering from Hurricane Sandy. And at that time, research and study was a 4-letter word. And people really wanted action. And that, I think, drove us at the Science and Resilience Institute to the recognition that there was a depth of knowledge and practice in public agendas work that we really needed to learn from, that we were acknowledging that the movement or a rhythm of an engagement process that I think Nicole alluded to earlier, particularly as it relates to community building, is different from the official timeline of a research grant or study, and that the engagement and the research would benefit from a harmonizing process. And that's what became Cycles of Resilience.
I would just kind of say Adam is right on point, because even if you're looking at some of the funding agencies, they're thinking 10 years now, because you're absolutely right. They're doing planning grants. You need 2 or 3 years to kind of get together, kind of get to know each other, see if you want to be together as a collaborative, and then the implementation and the evaluation. So really a 10-year cycle, much more than the 2 or 3 or 5 year cycles that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback off of some of what Adam was saying. I think, and yeah, our relationship did sort of grow organically, and it wasn't just a relationship between Public Agenda, a nonprofit, and a research institute, but it was also a relationship between the community and us. And I think in terms of how to develop the relationship, because at the end of the day, that is the heart of engagement. It's all about relationship building and relationship nurturing and relationship maintaining. So what we were very intentional around acknowledging is that work is already being done in the community. And the work that we were embarking on with the community was building upon existing efforts. So I think for me, that's really, really important to highlight when you're working with anybody, to realize that, you know, it very well may be building on ongoing efforts, and it's extremely important to honor that. The other thing that I would highlight is that quite frankly, very similar to what Dr. Pam was saying, we acknowledged that although we were taking a model that we, you know, sort of created for this work, it needed to be iterative. We needed to make sure that we were, if we needed to course correct, we had the flexibility to do that and acknowledge when to make those course corrections. We also wanted to be very intentional around power and voice. That was embedded in the model. We were working with community leaders who felt and were and in reality, their voices weren't heard in the rebuilding and recovery effort from various entities. So we wanted to be very conscious of that and make sure that throughout the work that we were doing, we were hearing from the communities, we were iterative in our process. We had a feedback loop, because that was acknowledged, as Adam said, didn't happen with the recovery effort, and how various entities sort of worked with the community during the recovery effort. And then sort of the final thing that we wanted to do is make sure that we didn't have formal, you know, charters or agreements. We just kind of jumped into the work. It was very timely, and in many ways time sensitive, just to get the project off the ground. So there was a lot of learning as we went. But in every stage, really thinking about how to embed diversity and equity and honor what's already being done. So even in the games, which I can talk about a little bit more, how we acknowledge power and tried to honor and sort of rebalance what was felt and experienced by the community, a lack of power, a lack of voice, making sure that we created a welcoming environment. We had folks on staff, myself and my other colleague, who were either from the community or from the same ethnic group, so West Indian, and understanding the rhythm of the West Indian community and how to align our work with the community. So all of these are, I think, really important to highlight when you're thinking about working with communities. And then the final thing is, within one community, there's diversity. So, you know, maybe what I know to be true as a West Indian living right next to Canarsie may not be what's experienced by others. So also keeping that in mind, there's no one way, one right way of doing things.
I want to sort of echo off on Nicole, because there are some instances where you might need to have something down on paper, because a lot of times you do have to resolve conflict. It's not an easy, natural kind of thing. And some of these grants with multiple PIs talk about how to share the power between two or three persons. So that's something to think about, I think, because the issues around power, race, gender always come up as well. So really having that in the back of your head and really being sensitive to it. But the point about flexibility, and in academia is very difficult, because you are on a really, really tight timeline. And I would often think about my relationship with community members as a relationship with my husband, for example. You know, if he calls, I need to drop, he's a high priority. Often the community would call for something that they needed from me, and I might be busy, but I would have to kind of flex up and be available. to them, vice versa, same for them with me. And I think about that particularly, Chris, with this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we've had to really call each other for different things. They might need me for expertise on why should you wear a mask, a seminar to the community, and they might call on me for mask, getting the resources for mask to the community. So that has been that flexibility, that just availability and presence. I never will forget, Chris, one of the other ministers said to me, now don't be sending your grad students out here to do this research. We want to see you, which meant if he called me for a meeting on a Wednesday, 3 hours away, I had to kind of adjust my schedule. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. I had to adjust my schedule to really meet their needs. And usually evening meetings, weekend meetings don't fit a nice, neat academic. And I'm sure Adam and Nicole know this if you're doing community engagement work.
Yeah, I think, and so much of what everyone spoke to is this kind of dynamics of capacity sharing, right? And these power dynamics. And, that speaks a lot to thinking about the ways in which, many underrepresented and BIPOC communities are really going through processes of healing from longstanding historical traumas that have been passed down across generations, of injustices, legacies of atrocities, of including those that came up a bit earlier, that have been wrought through colonial science and the extractive models of research. Adam saying that could be a 4-letter word, right? That you can speak about understanding these kind of dynamics, and so of what everyone's bringing into this partnership and collaboration. So I'd love to learn a bit, if you each can speak about ways that you have worked together really to rebuild relationships in communities that have been so affected by past and very much continued injustices today. If anyone would like to share on those points.
And I'll just piggyback off of what Dr. Foster had, started, in that we have true partnerships and have built relationships, and it's a reciprocal relationship because the researchers need the community for certain items for their work, and the community need them as well. And the global pandemic is one of those things. I was looking at some data about 2 weeks ago that said of the 50 counties with the highest rate per 100,000, 11 of the counties that I serve with the Black Belt Community Foundation is on that list. So it was a no-brainer for us to reach out to the University of Alabama. We have a relationship with Dr. Foster, UAB, and other partners that we have worked with about getting vaccinations and setting up vaccination sites. Well, they might not know where to go. We know where to go, but they have access to the resources. And so that has been a way that we have built positive relationships, and then dispelling so many other myths. As Dr. Foster mentioned, we had her come on and do a workshop to talk about the vaccinations and to talk about testing and those kinds of things, to make it clearer so that the community folks can really understand and to be able to put it in layman's terms. And I'll say this, in working with Dr. Foster and the team with Project SOAR, sharing opinions and advice on research, they were getting ready to do research in several Black Belt counties. So they wanted individuals to help them to look at the questions that they were asking. Because a lot of times, if you're a scientist, your vocabulary is one way and the community vocabulary is another way. So let's bring these questions in and let's get them screened by some stakeholders in the community. Say, what your folk really understand this. And those are the kind of things that have helped us, and we have built relationships and have made it, I think it made the data more accurate, because anybody can complete a survey. Even if they don't understand it, they can just mark a dot. But it's better if they know and they understand the questions. And we've built relationships like that. I want to say that they provided human subjects training. So they talked about the Tuskegee experiment and syphilis. They talked about all those things step by step and educated the stakeholders. And I think that was the beginning of even more trust in the researchers in the community.
Yeah, I can talk a bit more about cycles and how we thought about it. It is a different type of project from what Chris and Dr. Pamela are doing. In terms of the cycles of engagement, I wouldn't even say it has aspects of research, but I think it's rebalancing the relationship between scientists, citizens, people, and policymakers to create an environment where a mutually beneficial research can occur. I think it's just really aligning community needs with researchers. And so it wasn't actually, it was a different model of research, really around community building and activating a community and realigning community dynamics. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the community building phases. I think for me, the games were incredible. They were fun. As I said, they could be played in different settings, different types of people could play them. Kids love them. And then they brought their parents to it. So it was just really a fun way of just creating an environment that you can kind of relax, learn, and have fun. So in terms of Jamaica Bay Jeopardy, what was really interesting is the different categories. We had categories that you needed to have some sort of scientific knowledge to kind of win that category. Others may ask policy or jurisdictional questions about New York. So you need to have a little bit of understanding about that. And some questions, some columns had questions around, pop culture or different fun things around Canarsie, where is the best place to get a slice of pizza? So in order to play the game, you really needed to have a diverse group of people. You had to have somebody with some scientific knowledge, somebody with policy knowledge, and somebody from Canarsie in order to win. So you were able to show that it's important to have diverse voices at the table in order to win or in order to have a good policy or a good outcome. So you're really showing people different principles around diversity and inclusion without basically shoving it down their throat. The other thing, I think it acknowledged that people wear different hats. Just because I live in Canarsie doesn't mean I am not a scientist. In fact, one of our main community partners, we had almost like a board, a committee of different nonprofit leaders that helped inform the project, redesign it and implement it. And one gentleman, he is the director of sort of a coalition of Black associations, but he's also a nuclear engineer. So you can wear many hats. We had folks from the state senator's office who are always there, but they lived in Canarsie and they're active in their churches and they had their own community organizations. So it also showed people wear different hats. Honoring different types of knowledge is important, and people wear different hats. In terms of the boat ride, again, that was just a lot of fun.
The Ethnographic Project that I was on. It had two anthropology professors, a public health, a physician. I think that was a team, 5 of us. But we're even talking about historians and working across disciplines with communities to really deal with community research. So I think that point about collaboration and really looking for all the projects I showed you had large teams of researchers across different disciplines, but all of us having a heart for community engagement. So it's not just anybody. It's very intentional, I would say intentional collaboration that really is at the heart of community impact.
And I'll add to what Dr. Foster just stated. We're actually working with a team from the University of Alabama and with our local Head Start parents, administrators, and some staff with BBCF with a Robert Wood Johnson interdisciplinary research project. And I want to share that because I want the researchers on the call to know that it takes time, affection, and patience. You're not gonna build a relationship overnight. As we had our meeting with the parents in our community group to be a part of the leadership team, they kind of listened. They didn't really say a lot. So it takes time to get them involved and acclimated to what it is that you're doing. And that's why you need the other stakeholders to be there that they are familiar with and that they are comfortable with. So just remember, in building relationships, it takes some time, some affection and patience. And we got to be culturally sensitive. You know, we got to be sensitive to the needs of that community and those individuals as well.
I'll just add, I've been fortunate to work in a bunch of different institutional settings. So, you know, work in academia, work in government at different levels, working in a nonprofit, and in a bunch of different geographies with a lot of, you know, from sort of the scale of a neighborhood to you know, larger geographic areas and places. And I think what I've taken from all that is that it really is important to understand the other person's view, to really sort of appreciate what pressures they face, what priorities they face, what sort of, whether it's their, you know, personal or professional life. You know, if we can all understand each other, I think that helps be authentic, and that authenticity is important to everything that my esteemed panelists here have talked about with respect to trust building and relationship building.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add.
That was beautiful. Thank you, everyone. And coming back to the ideas of, you know, what really articulated through is also that flexibility and adaptability. And oftentimes we come in with these timelines and these notions of how things are going to go, and that really needs to kind of be left at the door. And the time has to go as to what the community is determining, right? And it could be times of crises. It could be times that allow more time to get to know each other, right? And I think a big part that came through as well is, especially Reverend Chris, when you were talking about with COVID-19 happening and being able to reach out to Dr. Pam, that you had already built that relationship. The time to build that relationship wasn't when the pandemic hit. That you already had that to be able to then call on each other, and especially in the disaster context, how important that becomes. Going to some of the questions that the audience has been bringing up, one person raised the question as to what role can or should communities and engagement play in areas of science that don't have immediate or even predictable effects on people's lives. And so thinking about things like, understanding atmospheric processes or astrophysics. I'm going to put this in the chat for you all to see. And so thinking about that role that can and should communities engagement play in areas of science that don't have that immediate or even predictable effects on people's lives. If any of you have a response to that.
I think making it relatable, even if it's not immediate, maybe relatable. Here where we are in Alabama and the West Black Belt counties, we have tornadoes. We are at risk of tornadoes all the time. So I think relating atmospheric issues to that and climate change to what we experience would probably be helpful.
And I would just add to that, we had a great debate at a board meeting recently about funding storm shelters from a community standpoint. We didn't have enough money to buy storm shelters for all 12 counties or whatever, but understanding those scientific issues, doing the research on what areas have been affected the most by these type of natural occurrences is very important.
Comes to mind for me is, and I'd mentioned it with the game that we played it with young people, and I would say to the extent that you can connect your research question to a curriculum and get young people involved, embed it, somehow connect with school or, a science club after, an after school club where you can get young people involved, interested, and then that, could be a vehicle to pull in adults. But I think the much you can connect it to something that's already going on in the community, whether it's a formal structure like the schools or an informal structure like, I don't know if there's a stargazing club in the community. I think just as much as you can embed it in the rhythm of how people already are engaging and learning and interacting, that could make your work, really speak to the community and have, sort of inroads in terms of partnering.
Yeah, that's a great point and speaks to the generational aspect of some of these problems. Like, the future generations are going to inherit some of these problems. I just want to quickly reiterate something that Reverend Christopher said earlier, which is that, I think, and build on and connect that to the point Nicole just made about learning. The point that Reverend Christopher made is, if you're going to where these problems like atmospheric processes, ultimately affect changes in climate, and changing climate is affecting people's lives right now. And if they are going to be able to participate in a survey or even deliberate about what should happen in their community, it helps to have an understanding of some of those processes. So I think it's not always, there's a difference between actionability and usability, sort of the tactical use of information and the indirect use of information in terms of empowering somebody through a stronger understanding.
But I just wanted to, I love what Nicole said about the youth, focusing on the youth, because the community, the projects I've done, they always want to focus on the youth because they see that as their hope. And so the Stargazing Club, those types of things, I think are wonderful opportunities to really engage young people in science.
Thank you, everyone. And I appreciate bringing that back to also, that this isn't reinventing the wheel. It's meeting people where they already are, what they're already doing, and continuing to uplift and build upon that, and often in a very intergenerational way. So you have that kind of knowledge sharing going across that they can then lift each other up and be supporting each other. Another question we have from the audience is, we've been talking a lot about trust building as very much a long-term endeavor. And so, can you address a bit how folks who might be there more in the shorter term, so thinking, students, postdocs, right, who often have a very bounded time that they're participating in these engagements, how do those folks kind of fit into the process? How are they able to, be part of these collaborations and work?
I think very, very important. With Project Faith, it was a 4-year grant, but medical students have a very prescribed time. But I had several medical students that went out with me to the churches to do the interventions. Even if it was for a 1-day session, they got a lot out of it because many of them haven't been out in rural Alabama. So really their first introduction to rural Alabama, many of them maybe an introduction to a different type of faith community than they're used to. So I think those opportunities were invaluable for them and helping me collect data. But also we had a postdoc. The project was a joint project with CDC. So one of the postdocs there actually wrote the papers that we needed in order to disseminate the product. So I think tremendous opportunities, if not long-term, but even short-term bursts can be life-changing, transformational.
And I'll add, in addition to Project Faith, Pam, you and I worked together on Saving Lives Initiative. And the Saving Lives Initiative was a partnership between the university and several churches. And we would go in and do workshops, educational workshops, but also screenings in those postdoc and undergraduate students would play a major role in the education and development in the screenings and those kinds of things. And I remember in the Hope Project, there was an environmental project, and it was pretty much led by a postdoctoral student, and Pam and Joanne, and Rebecca was there to, help guide and assist. And I was there from the community along with the other community leaders on the team. So the postdocs, students, undergraduates, and graduate students in the short term play a major role in helping to get a lot of the work done and getting great experiences.
I'll just add, and I'm sure Nicole has some really great things to add here, but I guess I'd highlight two things. One, I think, especially when you're in that mode of learning and being a student, you have a more open mind. And I just think students and postdocs bring a lot of creativity to projects like this, and flexibility and an open mind that's so important and adds to the kind of culture of the partnership. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I think it's super valuable to have people who aren't sort of stuck in their, we get bogged down with information, and we get bogged down with our kind of experience sometimes. And so it really helps to have that open mind.
And it's good to have the youth there as well, in the projects, and those postdoc students and undergraduates and graduate students it's good for our students to see them doing the research and being able to ask them questions, and a lot of them build relationships and become mentors. And so that's another bonus for having those students there in the short term.
I love what Adam said. The learners help the old folks because we do get stuck, and they are more open, but they bring a young energy. That's why I love working with students, because they bring an energy that really helps to keep us old folks going.
And Julie, one other thing, I know I was trying to remember something, I'll be super quick. I also think this is the case certainly with public universities here in New York City, and I think it's probably true of other places, is that students and postdocs are often not just members of their university or college campus or body. They're also people who come from the communities where we're doing engagement, and that's really important too.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. And thinking also that with that, the kind of accountability and responsibility when you're playing those multiple roles in the same space of being from that community, and the responsibility you have in this work now, not just to this project, but in this community, it's your family, and what they're taking on, and the responsibility that means for the whole team. And the mentorship that goes both ways, right? A lot of this was, that creativity that comes in, and there's mentorship that goes in both directions through this process, and thinking about the open heart and the open mind to creating, again, that very intentional space. We do have another question here I think builds really nicely off of what you all have been sharing of, considering, what do you do when your relationship building and the co-creation with communities, that it ends up really identifying needs that can't necessarily be addressed by the kinds of projects you're able to do? What kind of, do you have any response kind of in that process when that comes up? Because I am guessing it most certainly has in your work.
There are some pressing problems in rural Alabama that are so huge. I don't think I could definitely not solve them. Transportation being one of them, internet broadband access being another. But they're always on my mind because there's others thinking the same thing, even in the university and in the community. And I think eventually there will be a time where we can come together to really tackle those issues. I just have not been able to do it myself or found the niches where it could be done, but I think we're getting closer and closer. So for example, Chris was on this grant. We submitted for a Kellogg Foundation grant, which was 20 million for 10 years. And really we embedded in there issues around broadband access. So that type of money would probably help in that situation. We were a semi-finalist. We didn't get the project, but we're still talking about it, right, Chris?
Yes.
As a potential dream that we can't attack right now. And maybe we have to bring in other partners, but it is a dream that we would really like to address because of those are two huge barriers that really keep people unhealthy.
And I'll share a brief story. I think sometime when, if it's not your research interest and it surfaced during the time you were networking and meeting and building relationships, you know, a lot of times the researchers know other researchers at their universities. And the dean of engineering called my boss at the time and said, you know, I've got this request to go to rural Sumter County to help them set up a curriculum for a computer science course. And my boss said, well, you know, I just hired a young man from this area. So make a long story short, we goes to my old high school with my old principal and the teachers that I used to work with when I worked in K-12. We helped them with that project, but while they were there, they discovered that there were other great needs. And eventually out of that relationship grew a GK-12 sustainability grant from National Science Foundation for $3 million. So we were dealing with a $30,000 project or a unit at this school, and eventually ended up. And that project took the graduate students into the school. They was online with our educators, and they're mentoring our students in engineering and science and technology and math. And so lots of times I will say that if it's not your research interest, don't try to shuck and jive. Just be honest. And if you can put us in touch with somebody that have that interest, then you're gonna. I mean, you know, that's just so important to be honest about it. It's not your research area. And let me say this, because my boss is really interested in all our programs being evaluated. And you know, the foundation world, you know, that doesn't happen that often. And so now we know researchers. And if we were doing something in criminal justice or criminal justice reform or affordable housing, I could talk to Pam and say, hey, who are the universities working in this area? And use them as a resource to help you with other needs in the community.
Nicole, Adam, did you have anything to build upon?
No, I was just going to say the same sort of community building techniques that I discussed. I would use them in terms of relationship building with other partners that you could refer people to. I definitely agree. If you are not equipped to do the work, do not do it. There is, you know, like in medicine, you say do no harm. I see the same thing in community engagement. So do no harm and refer to others that can really support the community.
And there are also other researchers now. One of the pet peeves I have is that we have a lot of researchers who come and do research in Alabama, and they really don't really understand it. They're from New York or California or wherever, and they know the needs are there and they probably have the expertise to help, but they really don't know the community well. I would say they could come in and partner. Why not do that instead of, you know, just doing it sort of blindly? And I think there are, of course, we know the research intensive places can get the work done, but I say look at some of these smaller institutions for partners because they're closer to the community, like our HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and MSIs, who have good connections with the community and develop relationships with those researchers or academic partners. To really partner and not take everything, but really share and really gain and impact communities. And it's a tough thing to do. Even within my setting, I have to vet people to see if they really are, really have the heart of the community at stake. And I'm sure Adam and Nicole have had to do that as well. You have to really kind of vet and really advocate and look out for the community, as well as, and communities should be doing that as well.
Yeah, I was going to build on that point. I totally agree with everything that's been said, and was built on that last point by Dr. Pam, and extend, or hopefully extend, what Reverend Christopher and Nicole were saying. You know, it's important to say maybe the need isn't a research need, maybe it's, you know, a policy need or a capacity need. And so you do want to be honest about that, and then look for others that can come into your process. You also, I think, need to, when you're doing that, acknowledge that maybe there needs to be sort of a separate process, or that changes the space that you've created. That could change the space that you've created, right? So especially if you're talking about bringing in sort of policymakers or government officials, you know, there are laws at stake, and there are things that it sort of changes the nature of the engagement, not for bad ways necessarily, but just acknowledging that those could be sort of parallel processes or spin-offs that if it's going to disrupt sort of the central process that you're trying to sustain.
I think and so much of what everyone shared there is thinking about this kind of connective tissue, right? That you can be using, you know, where your positionality in making those connections. And again, that capacity sharing, and even if you don't have the answer responses, that you're, you know, utilizing the networks and building those connections across different entities, and helping to create that web of a really holistic approach to a diversity of needs and priorities. In just the last couple of minutes we have here, I'd love to just go back around to everyone, maybe just about 30 seconds or so each. If you would like to share thinking especially about, you know, kind of the form that we're in terms of thinking about, you know, professional science communication and engaging with communities. If there's anything you'd like to share, you know, really kind of reiterate, or anything that you haven't had the opportunity to bring up yet and to raise now. And so maybe I'm just going to call in the order I see you. So maybe if we go to Dr. Pam, Reverend Chris, Nicole, Adam, and then we'll turn it back over to Ilana.
I just wanted to end with relationships, of course, are important. Very, very important. I like the word courtship. My father used to ask me, instead of who are you dating now, he used to say, who are you courting? Or who's courting you? And I used to think that was so funny and old fashioned, but so true, that you need a courtship period. Take it kind of slow. I've worked with some colleagues who just wanted to get in there and get the data, and no, let's just kind of slow it down, get to know people, get to know our partners, slow down the process. So a courtship process is important, and relationships are important.
And I'll just say very briefly, thank you for giving me an opportunity from a community perspective to come and share with you today. And I want to say to the researchers, the scientists in the community that are on today, that opportunities like this, exposures like this, education like this can help shape the paradigm of how researchers in community will do research in the future.
So yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you again for the invitation. A number of things come to mind, a number of examples, but just an example that I wanted to highlight. We did a set of focus groups in New York City in various communities, mainly with low income parents with little children. I speak Spanish. We did them in Spanish and English throughout the city. And it was an incredible experience, even just with the introduction, giving people an opportunity to tell their stories. There were crying, the mothers were crying, because they love their children so much. But something that highlighted for me in my mind was the relationship. We were asking them about the relationship between them and their pediatricians, especially around social determinants of health, trying to understand if they understood that and how they actualized that in their life. They were extremely savvy. They understood what social determinants for health were, even if they don't use that terminology. They knew that they felt like the doctors actually didn't really respect them. They could sense just from the moment when they walk into a clinic, the way the doctors looked at them was with a little bit of disdain, the same way that they said that people like us who use the subway look at them when they're on the subway with their children. So it makes me think about how I treat others, even if I try and put myself in their shoes, whoever's shoes. I may not ever be able to do that, but just going into any situation with humility and understanding that people may have traumas or experiences that we may not really be able to relate to that can affect your relationship with them. I would also just highlight the fact that people and many poor BIPOC people have been studied and studied and studied, and for them, and sometimes it feels extractive. It feels like there's a complete power imbalance, and they feel almost like mice, like subjects. So just really thinking about how you just relate to people, how you treat people, making sure you don't treat them like subjects and refer to them as subjects, and just treat them with humility and respect.
Yeah, I would, that was so well stated, Nicole. And I think, I just want to, building on the theme of humility, say that, all of this experience was built, or at least my own personal experience was built through maybe doing some things right in some cases, and also making mistakes along the way. And I'm just acknowledging that, because that probably didn't have just bearing for me, but others. And I think, this work, you got to like the journey, you've got to love the journey. And for me, all of this work is as much about, my journey in the realm of science as it also is, if not more, my journey as a white male trying to practice anti-racism.
Thank you deeply, everybody, very much for your shared wisdom and your thoughtful and indeed very thought-provoking responses and reflections coming from years of experience and grounded work. So our heartfelt gratitude for all that you shared today. And I know we're just up at time now, so I'm going to hand it back over to Ilana to share a final poll about take-home messages from the session and for what's coming up next. So to all of our panelists who I know wear 10,000 different hats and roles and responsibilities, your gift of time is not taken lightly. And so I really appreciate you being here and taking this time and emotional energy this morning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, our speakers and all of our participants today. We really, really appreciate you being here. And I know we are closing at the end of time here, but if you're still with us, we'd love to hear, one word that you would take away from today's panel on Slido. It's the same event, number 203476. What is one takeaway from this session for you? Great. Care, kindness, trust, community-based participatory research, humility. It takes time. Got courtship in there, young generation. Thank you all. Thank you so much. That's great. So I'll leave that running, but I'm going to turn back to our final slides here, understanding that we are over time, but I just wanted to share, these are our breakouts coming up in an hour at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we hope you can join for one of those. And tomorrow we have an informal online networking reception for anyone interested in public engagement with science, also co-sponsored with the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion at AAAS at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. And we hope that you will fill out this very quick survey about this session. The link should be in the chat as well, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. So thank you so much, everyone.